don't worry. So, do we have any questions from last time, actually, before we start? Or any thoughts, musings? Yeah.
Okay, I went hiking,
Yeah.
and I took a couple of pictures because you were talking about how the trees like to have one winner.
Yeah.
But then I would see a few trees that had 2 winners.
Yeah.
And then I also saw a tree that looked like it had these huge discs, almost like spinal discs in your spine. There were just 2. And I'm not sure what those were.
I would need to see a picture.
Yeah.
But so like when we're thinking about the leader, right? And we'll talk about this today a little bit when we talk about form. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Okay, so when we're thinking about a leader, especially for large maturing trees, the reason we like to have a single leader is because it tends to be very strong, and it doesn't tend to have the problems associated with multiple leaders. When we have multiple leaders, oftentimes the attachment is not particularly strong. They will break apart from each other and will split the tree open. Like we'll see some examples of that, and that can be really problematic. The tree is just set up to try and maximize light, right, and take advantage of growth. So it's going to grow in every which way, and then basically it'll get controlled in by light. So the tree, if you're not careful, will end up like a shrub on a stick. And so that's why when we're pruning, we have to kind of go back in and reinforce that single form, is because that single form is strongest. It is often best for the overall health of the tree. But like trees are just like us. There's like what's best for you, and then there's what you're gonna do. And it can be a little bit helpful to have someone else being like, is that really what you meant, right? And so we're kind of that force in the tree's life, right? Like the guiding light to kind of try and get it back to a center growth. But we'll talk about other examples where it doesn't matter, right? For some of our small maturing trees, we talked about this a little bit last time as well. Those small maturing trees, especially if they have prune, can be pretty funky, and I actually think that's where their interest lies in the landscape, right? Like, to me, for example, some of my absolute favorite dogwoods are the ones that are like, like going off to the side and looking kind of funny. And I would never want to try and correct those trees into this sort of situation, Do we have any other thoughts or questions from last time?
I was just noticing that a lot of the trees that are lining streets are like completely split that way.
Yeah.
With the electrical wire on it.
Oh, yeah.
And it looks like they were split for a long, long time. And they look pretty even. And I don't know if it's pretty.
It's because, they just go through and cut out everything that possibly could touch that power line. So there's some interesting. When I first moved here, I made what I thought was a joke to someone where I was like, yeah, trees here grow in such an interesting way. I was like, I felt like that was a pretty easy setup. And they were like, no, power does that. And I was like, anyway, so that's Duke Energy and their contractors doing that. One of the fun little facts that I always really enjoyed was that the willow oaks that we have everywhere that are done into that form so often, when they were originally planted about 100 years ago now, there's these funny little side notes from the arborist who recommended them saying, like, the power lines could be a problem, but I'm not concerned because I'm sure we'll have buried them by then. Really? Okay. Yeah, so they balance, but I mean, that's very weak, and the moment that catches, if you have a lot of leaves on one side and they catch wind, especially when it's wet, those attachments are much more likely to split. Yeah. So today we have some of our special guests again. We have Tanya will be speaking with us after the first part of our class about Keep Darn Beautiful with it.
Sure.
Yeah. So at least do little introductions, and so that'll be great, and we will coordinate pruning. Yeah. So awesome. Okay, I'm gonna dive right in. Please holler if you have any questions. If we can send the sign-in sheet around, that would be great. If you don't see it during this portion, don't freak out. Just make sure you sign it before you leave. As always, please grab snacks. And so for today's class, we're going to be talking a little bit about right tree, right place. And then we'll be talking more and more about pruning, and sort of kind of early tree pruning is where we're going to focus, because that's what you'll be doing mostly as tree keepers. I would also argue that for larger maturing trees, that's a little bit above our pay grade, and I will help you find an arborist because they're quite good at that. We'll be hearing from Keep Durham Beautiful. I think we might be hearing from the next class as well, and then we're going to head outside mostly for the second part of the class. Okay, so when we are thinking about selecting trees, there are a number of different things we want to consider. And so for you as tree keepers, these are all things that the city and Keep Durham Beautiful takes into account, right? So they're going to take into account things like different goals for trees, how much space they have, all of this different stuff. When they're selecting those trees, you will be helping people plant. So when you're thinking through this for yourself, right, we can have a whole bunch of different goals for our trees. We can have shade, privacy, beauty, right? So for a shade tree, I might pick a tree that's large maturing and has kind of a nice open form. For privacy, I might pick something that's evergreen, right? I might be thinking about flowers, interesting bark, anything else like that. When we're thinking about how large the tree will get, think about both above ground and below ground. Remember, a tree is like a wine glass on a dinner plate. So even though you might have infinite space above ground, if you have a tiny little planting site surrounded by a bunch of concrete, you actually don't have that much available space, right? And so you might need to be picking something smaller and something really tough. Again, considering other benefits, one of the big benefits that I would mention here too is wildlife benefits, right? So things like if you already have a couple of, for example, oaks in your backyard and you want to plant a tree, you might pick something that is an oak because you know they're very good for wildlife, or you might actually pick something that produces, you know, more of a fruit or a berry because you already have a lot of acorns. Or you might produce something that is very flowering and good in the spring, right? You might be picking kind of like complementary food sources or complementary resources, right? When we're thinking about wildlife. And one of the major things we really need to think about is what's the site like, right? So what do you have to offer this tree? We have thought about all the things this tree has to offer you. What are you bringing to the table, right? So for space, again, power lines, buildings, soil volume, right? How much do you actually have? What does it look like above? Where are the closest structures? Where's the sun? For sunlight, there are varying intensities of sunlight, right? Not all sun is the same. So when we think about sunlight, if you think about this building, so this building, this is north, downtown is south. If I plant something close to this building on the north side, it will be shaded out basically all year, because remember the sun moves like this through the sky. Yes. And if I plant something slightly further from the building, what looks like sun? The interesting thing is that in the winter, the sun actually goes lower in the sky. And so this building will shade things in the winter that it doesn't shade in the summer. So for a lot of things that might not matter because they're deciduous, but for other things you need to take that into consideration, right? So like even for trees, I would kind of take into consideration, right, like how hot and how shady are you dealing with? Morning sun, so that's sort of on the east side of the building, is very gentle, it's very nice. Afternoon sun, that western sun, is hot. It's just hot, it's brutal. If you're looking at a tree and the tree, like if you look at the parameters for it and it says it wants, 2 to 4 hours of sunlight a day, maybe it's an understory tree. 2 to 4 hours of sunlight in the morning versus 2 to 4 hours in the sunlight in the afternoon are different, right? If it wants a limited amount of sunlight, it probably wants it early to midday. It probably doesn't want it blazing in the afternoon because that's just really harsh sun. For soil quality, thinking about levels of compaction, right? Remember we have these clay soils that compact really tightly, and also organic matter. Adding organic matter can help deal with compaction, but if it's bad enough, you might need to address it. This is from a series of walks I took a while ago, and you might not know what you're really dealing with, right, when it comes to soil quality. So this is a construction site, right? We see this red of subsoil, right? That's not even really considered like real soil, it's just clay. All the topsoil is gone. And then by the time the homeowner buys it, right, what little bits there are left are like green and mulched and have plants in them. And you might be like, you can grow plants in that. I see plants growing in that. Be like, you see plants planted in that. They're gonna have a hard time, right? So knowing kind of the history of your lot, honestly, for most of us, if we are living on a lot with a house on it, which I would assume most of us are, like a house or an apartment or a constructed site, there is compaction. Because for them to be able to build that building, they had to have heavy equipment, they had to have materials, they had to have everything piled on the site. So just know that you're probably dealing with compaction. You might, you'll definitely probably want to add organic matter, and in severe cases, you might want to till. And then this is also a great example of what we call heat sinks, right? So all of this pavement absorbs sunlight and energy throughout the day, and then even into the evening, it radiates that heat back out, and it's very, very hot, right? So if you think about trees in like the parking, you know in parking lots, how they have those little islands of green, and they're very optimistic that there's gonna be a tree in there. And like maybe there's nothing above it, so there's a lot of sunlight and a lot of open space. And there's even kind of like a big area for a tree to grow. It's completely surrounded by all this concrete and pavement though that's gonna radiate heat back out, and it's very, very harsh. So just be aware of that, right? This creates a very hot microclimate that you're just gonna have to deal with, and you're probably gonna need to be planting things that tolerate even higher heat than you might expect. I like to think of all of these things on kind of a continuum of what you can and can't change. So the further we go to this way, it's going to be easier and easier to change. So these first couple things are hard to change. Do you have a question?
With the heat sink,
Yeah.
is that true for if you're out in a more tree surrounding area, or is it more for the city that it sinks? Does heat always sink?
Heat always sinks,
Okay.
but it's more profound in the city because the city is a heat sink,
Okay.
right? Like the city broadly is a heat sink. And so like if you think about gardening here in downtown Durham versus gardening in the northern part of the county, it is hotter and harder here. And if I'm here in downtown Durham and I'm trying to plant in essentially an area surrounded by pavement, it's a little bit hotter than that, right? But yeah, we have this thing called the urban heat island effect where cities are just warmer because of all that, yeah, and other reasons. So things that are extremely hard to change. How much water does your site get kind of naturally, right? So is it naturally a very dry area, naturally a very wet area, maybe it's a depression or something, right? You can water and water and water, but remember this tree is, if we're lucky, going to outlive us. So like what's the plan, right? This has to be right for the tree. Soil type, heat sinks are the same type of thing. Right, so if it wants a sandy soil and you plant it in a clay, like, it's probably just not gonna work, right? It's probably gonna get root rot or some other problem. Soil pH is very hard to change. This picture was taken by my mom. And so what that's a picture of is, oh, so close. Okay, there we are. Okay, so what this is a picture of is this is a pin oak that came home with me when I was a very small elementary school kid. You know, they send you home with a tree this big and everyone feels very triumphant. And it started growing. We planted it, it was growing really well. My dad is actually a forester by training, so when he started noticing that the pin oak was not adapted to the soil where we were living, it had an iron deficiency, he started filling it with iron spikes, which is like an old school way to do that. And he did that diligently for years and years and years until finally the tree failed and they took it down. And this was her picture she sent me. She's like, this was his like effort of love to keep your little pin oak going, right? It just wasn't right. The pH wasn't right, meaning the nutrients weren't available in the right way, and it was never really going to survive, right? Soil biology, this can be changed. If you add organic matter, if you take care of your soil, you can do that, but this is definitely something you'll need to be working on over time. It's not an overnight fix. Organic matter, you can absolutely add organic matter. Again, you're going to need to be doing it for years and years. Organic matter is eventually going to help start solving this problem, and it's going to make your soil a little bit better as well. And finally, compaction we can fix. right? If you have a heavily compacted site and you're willing to do it, you can bring out the big guns. And I would not ever recommend tilling regularly, but as a one-time hard reset, if you know you have a compacted site, it can be useful. I view this as like, I had to get there for a reason, but there are reasons to till. Yes?
Is that because of danger of losing more topsoil?
Yeah, you could lose more topsoil, you're gonna disturb soil structure, you're gonna kind of mess everything up. Like, this is like a little bit of a nuclear option where I'd be like, you're gonna mess things up, but if they're already so messed up, then like, you know, yeah.
Will tilling clay do anything?
Yeah, so it does, but when I'm tilling, I would be adding organic matter basically in the same cleanup step. Because I want to break all it up and then I want to get that organic matter onto the ground as quickly as possible to try and start incorporating it into the new soil structure that forms. Yeah. Okay, so those are the things you can change. Thinking a little bit about what trees could be like, and I'm just going to give some really quick, just a handful of ideas for each type. We're going to work through tree sizes. There's so many other cool trees out there, and I'll give you some resources on how to find those. So starting out, we have kind of the shrub-like trees. These are typically multi-stemmed, typically less than 15 feet tall, and they're wide. You will see that the difference between shrub and tree is a little bit like philosophical, right? So this is kind of the shrubbiest end of trees or the treeiest end of shrubs. They're often planted for flowers, fruits, or berries. You can have some really, really lovely native ones. So if you have things like witch hazel with these really cool flowers, fringe tree, serviceberry, sumac, which I just love. I think sumac is really, really pretty. Hazelnut. We have a great serviceberry out front. That's a very nice tree, and it's probably 20 plus years old now, and it's been pruned, but it looks really nice. A lot of times these can be kept in a more tree-like form or in a more shrubby form, depending on how much you're willing to prune them. A similar group of trees are the small maturing trees. These are typically also somewhat smaller in size, but they tend to be more obviously a tree, right? Like they don't tend to want to shrub quite as quickly. And so what I mean by that is I'm thinking about things like redbuds, dogwoods, Japanese maples, right? These tend to look like trees even if we don't do a lot of work to them. A couple different species of magnolias, smoke tree. A lot of times in this group of trees, you'll find dwarf and weeping varieties of other trees. So this is a classic for this area example. This is a redbud called Ruby Falls. It was actually developed around here. Ruby Falls has purple leaves instead of green and is a weeping variety, right? So a lot of times you'll find these kind of really interesting trees that have really pretty leaves or really pretty flowers. I would say in general, I like to pick native trees first. I like to start with that list, and only if I have a real reason to pick something else do I kind of go away from that. But especially in kind of the shrub, well, not these small maturing trees, sometimes there's a tree you fall in love with here that's just going to be your pet, and I understand that, and it won't be native, but the natives have some really great options at this point. For medium maturing trees, we're looking at sort of kind of that next size up to about 60 feet at maturity. I will say for all of these things that the size they actually mature to is extremely responsive to site conditions. Any plant, if it's happy, is probably going to get bigger than the tag, and any plant that's restricted is not going to get as big as the tag. Also, these can have really, really different growth rates. Don't always go for a fast growing tree though. The faster the growing the tree is, oftentimes the weaker the wood is, and they tend to have problems. So I kind of tend to look for like a medium maturing tree. So examples you might see in this group would be things like the maples, elms, willows, pawpaw, which is a great native fruit, and that's really, really fun. Honey and black locust, river birch. You still have a lot of examples in this group of really interesting bark, interesting flowers, interesting kind of attributes, right? A lot of cool trees in this group. And finally, some of our largest maturing trees. These have huge benefits for wildlife. They have huge benefits for shade. they take a lot of space, right? Like, biggest benefits, biggest space. So if I can plant one of these on a property, I like to. And oftentimes, if you're a gardener in general, so you're worried about your vegetable garden, right? Like, some of us are worried about our vegetable garden and our flowers. We're like, I would love to plant that really big oak, but like, I'm not trying to shade myself out. There are slow maturing varieties, right? And you get to plant these and they're wonderful, and then that is someone else's problem, and your tomatoes get to like live another day. So this is going to be things like tulip poplar, which has just the best flowers ever. Neither a tulip nor a poplar, it's actually it's related to magnolias. American beech, catalpa, pecan, bald cypress. Really the oaks are kind of the star of the show here though. And oaks have a huge amount of benefit for wildlife. They're really, really, there's a reason they're popular. And so in thinking about what you might pick from native to non-native, this is also a continuum, right? Because it's not just one thing or the other. There's actually different ways to think about this. And so this is an example that's just not a tree, but I just really like Edgeworthia, so I include it as my example. So Edgeworthia, it's just a non-native shrub. And the flowers might get some action, but it's a non-native shrub, and it's not really closely related to anything native. So it doesn't have a lot of ecological value, it doesn't have a lot of any of that, right? Like, it does good things, it feeds the soil, it's got flowers, whatever, it's got benefits, but not a lot of ecological value. Then we have something where I would consider like a related non-native. So around here, there is a Chinese redbud that is often planted in really harsh sites. It can tolerate the harshness of those sites in a way that our native redbud can't necessarily, at least not the ones we can plant in the trade. So potential ecological value, right? Some of the things that eat our native redbud might recognize this and might be able to eat it. It's not going to be as good as our native redbud, but it's going to be better than something that they're like, the insects are like, I've never seen anything like this before. Like, I don't even know what you're showing me. Then we have what we call a nativar. So this is a native species. This is the American redbud, but it has been highly selected by humans and has been highly cultivated by humans to have traits that it wouldn't naturally have out in the wild. So very, very popular for redbuds are these purple leaves. You'll find this in garden plants, you'll find this in trees, right? This idea of a native species, but highly, highly cultivated to the point where it has traits you wouldn't normally see. For those keeping track at home, 2 of the traits that can be the most problematic for pollinators and for other insects actually are purpling of the leaves. Purple is often a plant's natural defense, right? It is trying to toughen up. And so a lot of times there's research showing that this sort of purpling can make them harder to eat, can make them harder to deal with. The other thing you might see, although this is non-trees, this is more like on flowers, is when they take something from having what we call a single bloom into a multiple bloom. So have you guys ever seen like the purple cone flowers that have been bred to look like, you know those chickens who like their feathers come down over their eyes and they like can't see what's going on? These cone flowers have been bred to look like those chickens, right? Like there's just craziness everywhere. When the flower becomes that distorted, pollinators have a hard time getting to resources, and the plant has a hard time producing resources. So this is okay. You know, there's still some value. Then we have native varieties. Not every redbud out in the forest is the same, right? There are natural differences in the redbuds, and one of the natural differences they found out there was redbuds that produced white flowers. That's a natural variety, actually. It's much less common than it would be the way we plant them, but, right? And then finally, what we consider a native of the straight species. This is just like, it's just a redbud. It doesn't have a fancy name associated with it. It was probably grown from a seed someone found or from a cutting of a seed that someone found, right? Like that's just a redbud. Those are going to be the ones that kind of bang for your buck, have some of the most ecological value, and they also maintain genetic diversity if they're propagated from seed. But you can be anywhere on this continuum. I'm not saying one side is good and one side is bad. I'm saying we get to think about where we are and make decisions about what we value, right? And like, no judgment here. I 100% have an Edgeworthia in my garden. Like, you can take it from my cold dead hands. But I also see some real value in planting these trees that are grown from like local native seed, right? One of the things to keep track of is that oftentimes you're gonna end up kind of in this area, like more likely a native-are, and that's just because it's also what you can buy, right? Most of the time when you go to the garden center, you're gonna find a tree that has a name on it. It's not just a species, it's a variety too, and they have improvements, right? They might be stronger growers, they might be better adapted. So this can be a good and reasonable place to be. A couple of extra resources for finding the tree of your dreams. This is the North Carolina Plant Toolbox. This is developed by Extension. I will send all these links, don't worry. But it's a great thing because it's got pictures of everything, it's got facts of everything, it's got a find a plant tool, so you can go through and just be like, I have this soil and this much sun and I want it to look like this and blah, blah, blah. And then it gives you like 10 recommendations. And here are pictures, all of them. New Hope Bird Alliance has some really, really, really excellent plant lists where you can go through and find things both by what they're like, condition-wise, growth-wise, but also by how many pollinators they support, how many caterpillars really they support. And then the Native Plant Finder from the National Wildlife Federation is also really good. Again, I'll send you all those links. I know, I just like that picture. Someone was like having fun, right? Okay, so we're gonna move into pruning, but do we have any questions? Yeah.
Where do crepe myrtles land on that?
Oh yeah, they're non-native and like totally wild. Like not wild in like the bucolic sense, like in the like what are you doing here sense. But until they started getting crepe myrtle bark scale, which is the thing that turns them black and kills them. That's a gross oversimplification of the situation, but they filled a planting niche that was hard. They would take harsh conditions, they would take small planting areas, they would take abuse. And so that's why they were planted, right? Like they're beautiful, but like why are they planted so much as street trees around here? It's like they could take this level of abuse that in some ways it felt like it was a crepe myrtle or a very small number of other trees or nothing. But now we have an insect pest that's really kind of destroying them, which is really unfortunate because I wouldn't put a crepe myrtle just anywhere, but there were places where I'd be like, that was a viable answer, you know? Yeah.
How much and what trees are planted, especially like roadside, does dropping fruit or dropping nuts, like there's a use to that, right, that we get to eat them, but there's also a problem, or some people would experience as a problem of like staining the pavement or whatever.
Do you want to take that one?
I like nut and fruit trees, but people in general unfortunately do not.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've like politely inquired about, like, could we maybe somewhere sometime, and it's, there's just enough anger about it, that it's not something that's happened. And I know some cities on a small scale have tried to experiment, you know, like fruit tree gardens, orchards, things like that. Again, I think it's great, but it's, I mean, I have.
There's complaints about it.
Oh, like a lot of complaints. I mean, I had someone 2 months ago emailing or messaging, emailing and calling about an oak tree that was dropping acorns. And it was like a 7, 8 beautiful oak tree and like little tiny.
They're like, congratulations.
Yeah, it was great, and I was really happy. We were like, that's amazing. It's doing so well. We're like, no, we hate this. What's going on? Cut it down. And then we have to, well, we get to be like, have to be like, well, no. Cut it down, and but you do have those balances, especially when you're dealing with people, that you pick your battles, maybe, and it's like the
Yeah.
great myrtle thing. I had someone today, I had to tell, you don't get to request this specific variety, and we actually aren't planting them in Durham right now, or
Yeah.
probably ever again, because there's lots of them, and to your point, like the bar scale is such a thing, we're not gonna plant something that we actively know is not gonna survive. It's like dogwood.
Yeah.
It's just, it's unfortunate. I love dogwoods, but there's not viability there. Doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me always think of like sweet gums, right? Like the hatred people have for sweet gums, and you're like, they're fine. Like it just sucks to step on a sweet gum ball. Like, but that doesn't, anyway, yeah.
Question about tree placement. Okay, because my nonprofit plants trees all over the triangle, mostly in residential areas, and so we're working with those tiny,
Yep.
compacted new builds. We went through and did assessment in this townhome community. They had no trees in the inside. It was all buffer.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's hot, which is like the argument for planting trees,
Yeah.
right? Because they help cool it down. So I'm trying to figure out what size tree, and can you do it by the size of maturation? Like, a small tree should go into this right-of-way area, or if someone's yard is really tiny, you can do a small tree, or can you actually put a big tree? Do you consider like the root spread? So I'm trying to figure out the best way to do tree placement, considering,
Yeah. I'm gonna kick this one to you too, because I feel like you probably think about it more than I do.
I mean, it's not only for me like the size, but it's also can the tree, it's like, goes back to like the soil and the
Yeah.
conditions, is it gonna be able to survive in poor conditions? Because it kinda goes hand in hand, I don't know if you agree, but
Yeah.
it's like the devil strip or whatever you wanna call it, this really small, compact little area. You can assume that it's not just that small area, but it's probably kind of that red clay mixture of not great conditions. So I would just be looking for something that's super hardy, can kind of grow and survive in anything, and take, and then like obviously water and other factors like that. But I mean, that being said, you will see, like a willow oak growing in a small spot, but that most likely wasn't always a small spot. It's been reduced down to that. But there absolutely are examples I've seen of stuff that was planted in the last decade where it was like that, and life found a way.
Yeah.
It's
And is that listed? Like, these are the hardy trees that withstand our new harsh environments from development and city life.
We can probably come up with some ideas for that.
yeah.
Yeah, we can come up with that. Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna move through the pruning section. This will be good. And we'll see a lot of this when we're outside too. Okay, so thinking about pruning, some of the reasons you might prune, maintaining overall plant health, right? This can be really important. Increasing light under the canopy. So this is something more for us than for the tree. Like sometimes I like to think about these from the perspective of like, does it benefit the tree or benefit me? If the way that you're gonna make peace with the tree in your yard is by having a little bit more light on the ground for everything else you wanna grow, it is better to prune it a little bit than to, do the big job. Improving safety, it's gonna be very important, especially for what we're doing as tree keepers. Improving ornamental aesthetics. Managing growth and size, and a lot of what we'll be talking about is kind of more in this category of training young trees. So as we talked about last time, so many of our trees evolved to live in forests or with other trees around them with other constraints on them, and then we put them out in open spaces with so much sunlight that that's not really how they evolved to grow, and so we often have to kind of go back in and impose some constraint on them because otherwise they will end up like shrubs on trunks. So this tree, for example, looks pretty good overall, but when you actually start looking kind of into the heart of it, it's got a multi-liter situation just kind of exploding right here. And so we'll talk about this example in a little bit of like what we can do to fix that. One thing I want to stress before we go any further with this is that different trees have different forms. One of the apps I really like on my phone for plant identification is Seek by iNaturalist. It's really easy. It's like a photo-based or a camera-based thing, and it can help you figure things out pretty quickly. So if you're out pruning and you don't know what you're looking at, that can really help. But a willow oak can grow into this huge, beautiful, wonderful form, right? They don't all actually naturally grow U-shaped. A Japanese maple is going to be very, very different. I have no desire to get this tree to look like this. It can't, it won't, it doesn't look right. So know what you're kind of working with when you're starting, what's natural for that tree. And for some of our smaller architectural trees, also considering kind of what you want from that tree, right? That can be really, really helpful because a lot of times pruning is a multi-year endeavor and you are doing some cuts now to set yourself up for later. to take care of these trees. What you'll see with street tree pruning is we're oftentimes harsher than we would be when you're in your own yard, and it's because maybe no one's coming back, right? So you might need to do a little bit more work in each session than you would do on your own trees. You can also make some of these choices for your trees on how you want to set them up, but in general, with small trees, you have a lot more latitude. With large maturing trees, we want to be going for a central leader for as long as we can. Some pruning basics. Limit your pruning to 1/3 of the canopy per year and less for mature trees. The way you do this is by literally, you take a look at that thing before you start. Everything you prune out, I like to put it in a pile. I step back often. I say, does the pile look like proportional to what I'm left with, right? You're taking a lot of steps back to make sure, because otherwise you're going to get in there and you might go a little ham. So step back a lot. Pruning of dead, damaged, diseased, or deranged, we call these the 4 Ds, can happen at any time of year, right? There is no benefit to leaving dead, damaged, diseased, or deranged on the tree. Deranged, you know it when you see it, right? It's the branch that's like out into the sidewalk, right? You're like, you can take him out. If he's poking someone in the eye, if he's coming for someone, if he just is really offending you, right? You can do a little bit of that. Dead, damaged, and diseased is a lot more apparent. There's no benefit to leaving that tissue on the tree. It just is a way for disease to get in further. Major pruning is typically done in the late winter or early spring. Really anytime in the winter. Late winter, early spring is nice. You know, the idea that you're pruning basically right before the tree breaks dormancy and wakes back up so that the cuts don't have a lot of time to sit there and just dry out and get weird, and they're going to heal during that green up. But when you prune too much later than like early spring, you're just stressing the tree out because it's losing tissue during an active growing season. It's going to try and compensate. It's just not good. So you want to do it when the tree's dormant. A couple of major pruning strategies you'll see. These are like types of cuts. Our first one is thinning. A thinning cut is when you cut branch back to a point of origin, right? So this branch attached like right here, you're taking it all the way back down to that point of origin. It's the least conspicuous pruning method, right? You don't end up with a bunch of little weird shortcuts that you can see everywhere, right? Because you've taken things back down to the point of origin. If I was going to do thinning cuts, you know, I could also, imagine none of these other cuts had happened. I could also thin by taking out this whole one down to the ground, right? That would be another kind of conceptual way of thinning because I'm taking it out all the way down. The one thing you want to be really careful about though with thinning is you can go wrong. Too much thinning can lead to what we call lion tails, right? So this thing was thinned so heavily, all of these, there were a bunch of little side branches, right? And they were all taken back to the point of origin. So now you have a little tuft out here on a long lion tail. The problem there is that now all of the weight of that branch is up here where these leaves are. And so it kind of creates like a weird balance issue where it's going to be more likely to split down to here. Whereas if the weight were more evenly balanced, see how this one still has side branches? It's a little bit stronger and a little bit healthier. So just because this is like the least conspicuous cut, just still shows some restraint, you know. This is in contrast to what I think offends a lot of our sensibilities, which would be reduction cuts are one thing. A lot of times I think we see this not done properly and it's just, you know, kind of a big cut chop across the top. A reduction cut's a little bit different than that. A reduction cut takes into account kind of overall tree structure and health, but it still is more conspicuous than thinning. So in a reduction cut, we're cutting back to a lateral, right? So this is the branch we're talking about. This is the branch we're talking about that was cut, and this is its lateral, and that was topped back, but it was topped back to a lateral, right? Not just to some random part on the trunk where nothing else was connected, but to a very obvious point. This is again a rule of thirds, right? So you can take off up to 1/3 per year. In a reduction cut, you prune back to something where this branch should be at least 1/3 the size of whatever you're cutting, right? If I were to prune a trunk this size or a branch this size back to some little twig, right? Say I wanted this guy cut too, and I was going to cut him right here to this little twig. That doesn't count, right? Whatever you're pruning back to needs to be kind of at least a third the size. It can be nice to do these cuts, especially if they're facing up on the diagonal like that, because it helps watershed and it doesn't just kind of sit there on top. It's less desirable than thinning because you do create this large open wound that's very, very hard for the tree to heal. It's more conspicuous, it's problematic, but when you really need to take down the height of something and you don't want to have to go all the way to the ground with it, or you don't want to have to go all the way back, this can be acceptable. We'll see a case later on where this is actually the type of cut you do. But in general, I'm not trying to do this. Like, again, this is like picking a non-native tree. You can do it, but know why you're doing it, right? And one of the other big problems with this type of pruning is that we think, oh, this is a great way to reduce size, but remember our example of apical dominance from last time, where you have this little point at the top of the plant or at the top of the branch, making all the other side branches not grow. If I now try to reduce the height of this plant by just lopping off the top, or even very effectively cutting it back to a lateral, at least a third the size, it explodes, right? All these side branches now. And so what I thought I was doing, taking the size down, I took it down for that season, but in the following season, everything is going to explode out and start racing up. Yeah.
Would you do that intentionally if you were trying to produce more fruit on a tree?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things you do when you're planting young fruit trees is you actually go through and you take them down to about 20 inches. Like one of your first moves is to top them, and it's because you're trying to create scaffold branches. Like you're trying to do a thing to their form
Yeah.
that is. We have great literature on that if you want to read about that, because it's just not a standard pruning method.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to be trying to make mostly thinning cuts. If we make reduction cuts, there's a reason. A couple of the tools you might actually want to use for all of this. I have examples, and I'll pass them around. Everyone be careful with your fingers. So we have bypass pruners. They are called bypass pruners because like the blade actually bypasses this, right? They're like scissors, right, when you think about it. These work really, really good for live tissue. You can get all sorts of different brands. They're all pretty effective. There are fancier ones, there are less fancy ones, it's fine. One thing I want to note really quickly is that if you're going to be doing a lot of pruning, it is worth sharpening your blade. You can get these really nice little pocket sharpeners. I think probably a lot of people make them. The one I have is made by Corona. I like Corona tools for kind of a mid-price range tool. And when you're sharpening your bypass pruners or eventually your loppers, you just run this sharpener against the angle. There's like the blade has an angled side and a flat side, and you only ever run it over that angled side. So I'll pass both of these around if you want to take a look. We also have an example going around of, we have a couple examples of these, and just different styles. Another tool you might want, so bypass pruners are in contrast to angle pruners. You might see these every once in a while. They're kind of an older style, and they're also more effective for dead tissue, for like cleaning out stuff, but it's not what you're doing here. Where instead of a pair of scissors where they go past each other, you have a flat surface, the anvil, and the blade just goes like this, right? It hits it. The problem with that is that it mashes, right? And so if we're trying to do clean cuts to encourage kind of healthy healing, we don't want mashing, we want cutting. Does that make sense? So we're not using those. Loppers, right? Loppers are pruners, but big. This is for larger diameter cuts. I can pass these around as well. These are a brand I like because you can replace all the parts, but any of these will work. One thing I will caution is that as a somewhat smaller person, I have a tendency to buy smaller tools. That's not how physics works, right? You actually want as long of a handle as you're going to tolerate, and it's because it's what gives you the strength when you're actually doing this, right? Because it's your fulcrum, and you need that leverage. So size up a little bit on these as much as you feel comfortable. A handsaw. Handsaws for pruning are a little bit different different than just like a standard wood saw because of the way the teeth are on the blade. They also are really, really nice because they fold, which helps you stay safe, right? These serrated blades cannot be effectively sharpened, so if you know you're going to be using your saw a lot, investing in a high quality saw will give you a higher quality blade and will typically give you a product where you can replace the blade very easily and the parts are easily accessible. I know with some of these kind of more basic ones, even if you can replace the blade, sometimes you have a hard time finding what you want.
Do you have a brand recommendation for that?
I tend to buy whatever's cheap, to be totally honest, because I like oftentimes like am not as good to my tools as I could be, and I find that like going to a big box store and getting something that works is fine. It's fine. One thing you might get into if you're doing a lot of this is a pole saw. A pole saw will have essentially basically like a handsaw blade, but on an extension, and a lot of times on the other side you'll have almost like a pruner that you can close with a string or with a cord, and so you can kind of get up there. If at the point where you realize you need a pole saw, you want to tap out, I encourage that, right? Like, I think that's fair too. I very intentionally did not list a chainsaw because you don't need one. At the point where you think you need a chainsaw, I would tap out. Chainsaws can be like really dangerous. You need all sorts of special protective equipment if you're going to do it properly. I had an arborist giving a demo one time who's like, remember, a chainsaw works by extracting tissue in that area. Like, it's not a clean cut, it like pulls tissue out. And it doesn't care if that tissue is wood or human, right? And I heard that and I was like, hire an arborist, got it. Like, can do. If you feel good using a chainsaw, that's between you and your chainsaw. Okay, so real quick injury review for tree injury. And I brought an example of something that I meant to bring last time, but I didn't. And so this you can pass around, and you'll see there's a hard line right here in this tree. This was a perfectly healthy looking tree that we were taking down for making mushroom logs. And when we cut into it, we found all this darkening and beginning of decay in the middle, and we also found, these hard straight lines, which you don't find hard straight lines in nature unless an organism is really trying to create one. So that's one of those compartments that we talked about, right? So where what happens is that the tree gets injured, say right here, maybe by an ambitious tree keeper pruning something. And the first thing it does is it plugs up the vascular tissue above and below. Then it plugs up kind of that internal wall. Then it plugs crosswise, which is what you can see on those examples. The straight lines are if you were looking down crosswise at that tree. And then finally, it's going to heal here. And the reason I bring this up again is because we can't do much to control most of these walls that the tree is forming, right? Most of the ways that it's sealing off. But we can give it as clean a cut here as possible and at the best location that it can seal that exterior wall as well as possible. Again, remember, people heal, trees seal. Even in healthy trees, you might see this sort of damage internally. And so the way we kind of work on this is that the tree has special regions where it can seal even better. Then we want to take advantage of that. We want to do clean cuts and we want to do them at the right spot. And so one of the major places that we're going to see that is actually at the branch collar. So this is the main trunk. Here is a branch coming out, and you'll see right here, see that flare? Do you guys see that? Kind of goes like this. Over here, you have it kind of going like this. That is an area that seals particularly well. The tree is set up to seal well there, right? And we want to take advantage of that. So if we were doing a cut, we want to cut right outside that branch collar. And if I'm going to err one way or the other, I want to cut further out rather than further in. I never want to do a cut that is flush, right? If I do a cut right like that, I've cut through all of this healing tissue. If I do this cut right here, that's great, it can heal really well, it'll actually callus over. If I do my cut too far out, there are downsides to that. You're leaving some tissue that's just going to decay, it's going to have a harder time callusing over. But this is worse than this. But take your time and cut where you want, right? Which is right outside that branch collar. So how do you actually do this? Throwing a lot of stuff at you. So first off, locate the branch collar if it's present. The only time it won't be present is on very small branches. And even then, I would just be like, once you've done this enough, you kind of know roughly where it is, even if you can't see it, right? You're not doing a flush cut, you're doing it just outside. What would be that? If a branch is greater than 2 inches in diameter, you probably have heard of this, the 3-cut technique, right? So what that looks like, these are for larger branches. If you try on a larger branch to just go in and cut, you're gonna cut, and then the weight of this branch out here is gonna start falling, and it's gonna tear the bark all the way down. So we're trying to get ahead of that. So on this 3-cut technique, your first cut is actually an undercut, maybe a foot out, 6 inches to a foot out. And my goal there is actually to cut through that bark, right? So I might cut up just an inch or two, like if I'm lazy, I'm just trying to make sure I get through the bark, make sure I get through the majority of the tissue that can tear. Your second cut removes the weight. You go outside of where your first cut was, and you actually cut that branch all the way off, right? You don't want a bunch of weight pivoting when you're cutting. You just want to take that out of the equation. And then your final cut is your actual proper cut, right, outside that branch collar, right? This is kind of your clean cut. These 2 cuts were just setup cuts. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What's the purpose of the undercut? What does it do?
The undercut makes it so that if I start cutting here, and it starts ripping, it's going to hit that undercut, and it's not going to be able to rip all the way down,
Okay.
right?
It also keeps from binding the saw
Yeah.
when you're making your cuts.
Yeah. This is what happens, right, when we don't do this sort of technique. This person's also like kind of doing flush cuts, like this person's having a hard day. But when we don't do this, right, all the weight of this branch as it was being cut just came and pivoted down like this and just tore. And that's really hard to seal. That's a mess for the tree, right? Yeah.
Define the branch collar.
Yeah, so the branch collar is this kind of slight widening right in here that you see. It's circles around the branch. And it is an area, I think it's actually full of a bunch of type of like specialized stem cells that are really good at sealing. And it will also kind of create this sort of callus tissue over that cut in your best case scenario where it's able to grow up and over that cut.
So it's kind of the origin of that branch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if like ontologically it is, but yeah, it is where that branch comes, it's where that branch attaches back down to the main.
Okay. It's not indicating that it had previously been pruned back there.
No.
Okay.
What about those little baby chainsaws? You know?
I mean, it's your business.
Okay.
I just don't.
I do too. It's okay.
The little electric one
is great.
Yeah. As long as it's not harming the tree though, you know?
It's not. I'm not a chainsaw. I'm not worried about the tree.
Okay. Great.
Okay. So let's move a little bit quickly. Just make sure we can get through all this. So for training young trees, we want to prune early to prevent problems later. Right? So this is a tree that was properly trained. This is a tree that was allowed to have multiple leaders. So to do this, we want to remove dead, damaged, and diseased branches. You can always do that. That's a good first step. It does count against your third that you can remove. So I like to knock that out first and just know what I've still got to work with. Select and establish a desired structure. For our example, we're going to be talking about a central leader here. You're going to want to, over time, establish a lowest permanent branch, right? When you plant a large maturing tree like an oak, if you plant that tree and it's this tall, every branch you're looking at will come off eventually, right? Because typically we want it to be able to walk under that tree. So as it grows up and as it gets taller and taller, you'll start pruning it up, but that could take time. And then scaffold branches are what we think of as sort of the major branches of the tree. And as possible, if you have a choice, you like to leave them kind of well spaced around the tree, right? You don't want a bunch of major branches coming off all in one direction. You want like a major branch here, a major branch here, you know, further up and further up. You want them spaced. Sometimes if I can see major branches forming right next to each other, I might make a choice and take one out. So coming back to this example we saw earlier, it's overall healthy, but has multiple leaders. and the lowest branches can't stay, right? We can't walk under that tree yet. So come zooming into the middle, this is what I mean by multiple leaders, right? It's all kind of, you know, maybe I would think it would be nice for this to be the leader eventually, but I've got this coming off to the side. This is a species that's very prone to this, and I'm not sure how much you can actually fix it, but we're gonna act like we can. Why do we care about multiple leaders? This is a tree from my old backyard. I love that tree. When you have multiple leaders like this, and they're all roughly the same size, they're very prone to splitting, right? So if a bad wind catches this thing, that could split right off, right? Hadn't happened yet, so like, I'm sure it was fine. But this is something that if the tree had been younger, it would have been nice to correct. This is just inherently a stronger attachment than this, just based on how the tree is built.
So if this tree was within that branch falling on your house,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say that, like, oh, it's August and hurricane season is coming, is that something you'd want to, like, proactively remove? Or you say, no, it's been there, it's structurally sound, you don't do anything?
I would get an arborist out to do a risk assessment, is really what I would do in that case. My house is right here. This is an apartment complex. And we had someone out and take a look at it, and they were like, it's okay, but other people might make a different choice. So the way that we address these multiple leaders is this is where we come back and we start thinking about those reduction cuts. This is where a reduction cut can be really useful. So if we want to make this our central leader, and this is kind of the leader that's trying to compete, we can actually come back and do a cut right there on this thing, reducing that branch back down, and it's going to slow down the growth of that branch, allowing the main leader, the true leader, to take over. Let me give you an even better example of that. This is an old picture, but I think it's a great one. So this is a tree, it's from like a University of Florida publication, and what they're really worried about with this tree is that it's got two leaders, right? So here's one, here's one. So what they do is they decide they don't want this one to be the leader, so they come back and they do a reduction cut. See that? They cut it right back to that lateral. That's a good size. As the tree grows, this is where they did that cut, right? This, that was threatening to become a co-dominant leader, is now just another branch. It just got knocked out. All the leaves, all the like little kind of photosynthetic potential of that thing, you knock it out when you do that reduction cut, it slows the branch down, it allows the leader to take off.
Is there a reason why they would just cut it back to
I think they were worried that they'd be taking so much of the canopy out that they could stress the tree out, so instead they made this decision to do this kind of lesser cut.
In that picture, it's more than a third.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like this thing's only got so many leaves, right? But that was the best they could do, and it ended up really working out.
Ashley, is that, I can look at this, sort of the science of it a little bit more to understand it later, but one way of understanding that is like, no, you're not the leader. Like, stop it.
Yeah, I think that's
And
something.
there's also like, I think it confuses me a little bit because when you top a tree, you're saying go out.
Right.
And so part of me thinks if you make that cut, that branch is gonna go out.
Yeah, so, and that's a good question. So what's gonna happen here is that when you top it here, this still maintains like pretty strong apical dominance and it fights this down. Whereas like right now they're fighting it out and it's a little bit hard to know who's gonna win, but here you've really subordinated this one to this one. So it's why it's called subordination.
Okay.
And so that's gonna definitely work. Also, like, and I've read about this a lot and I might be wrong, but it's very confusing to me. Trees and plants in general, they produce sugars, they produce all this other stuff, and it's highly mobile through the plant, but some of it also actually matters kind of locally. And so as much as the photosynthetic potential here matters for the whole plant, it actually helps locally too. And you've knocked some of that out too, right? So it's not fed quite as well, it's not maintained quite as well, and it's really being knocked back by this apical dominance. So it's kind of got like a multi-level approach. Yeah.
Do you mind actually reviewing, I I knew the 1/3 rule with regard to the canopy, but just with this example, are you saying that 1/3 of the full branch that connects to the trunk needs to still exist? So like the bottom?
Right, so no, so this one needs to be cut back to a lateral that is at least 1/3 of the size, which they did.
1/3 of the size of what was cut?
Yeah, like this one, okay, this lateral should be at least, oh, and yeah, it's not. I don't know, it's hard to tell, there's a bunch of branches and it's grainy. This needs to be at least 1/3 the size of this main one that they're cutting, right? This is the kind of stuff that like, yeah. Let me keep moving, but let's talk about it a little bit more afterwards. I'd be like, just be close.
Okay.
Be
I was
close.
just confused about what the variables are. Not
Yeah,
that
there's
it's-
1/3 of the overall canopy, and then there's on this one, you don't want to be cutting back to a tiny lateral. You want to be cutting back to a kind of a meaty lateral that's like proportional. Yeah. Okay, so this is 5 years later. All right, so we are going to skip that slide. All right, so pruning workflow, when we're thinking about this, first, step back, assess the tree, and come up with a plan. Don't get in there and just start cutting. Like, know where you're going with this, okay? Think about what form you want, whether it's a central leader, how you might want other branches aligned on the tree, what's going to be your lowest permanent branch. No, you're not all going to do this. You're not typically going to do all of this in one pass. It might take you multiple years. Next, remove the 4 Ds, dead, damaged, diseased, and deranged. Keep in mind you want to be doing thinning cuts as much as possible. It keeps it more natural. And keep pruning until you have about 1/3 of the canopy or less taken out. Check throughout, pile them next to where you're working so you can clearly see that, okay? This is an art as much as it is a science. You'll get better at it as you do it more. You will make mistakes. It's okay. It's fine. Like, that's just part of learning, is you're gonna like do some cuts, then you're gonna step back and be like, next time, next time, right? But that's part of learning. And we're gonna have slightly different calls, right? I might prune a tree and you prune a tree, and they're different, but they're both okay. And that can be maddening, but that's part of the process. When you do need to call in a professional, there's a way to find people who are educated about trees, who have kind of committed to this as a profession, and that is looking for people with certification. Typically, we're talking about ISA certification. You're going to want to make sure they have insurance, references, clear quote and contract. If you go to Trees Are Good, you can find ISA certified arborists. There are a number of different types of certification, whether it's just kind of the basic certification, or if it's a risk assessment, if it's a master arborist. This is a really, really good resource for finding someone who has kind of at least some level of training in this. But neighborhood listservs are often really good, and then you make sure they actually have the credentials they say they'll have, right? So, with that, I'm sure we all have questions, but I want to turn it over to Tanya for at least a minute, or an introduction, or whatever she feels moved to do.
Yeah, I'll just say hello for a moment. So I'm Tanya, I'm the executive director of Keep Durham Beautiful, and we really appreciate all of you and your interest in learning about trees and tree care, and also hopefully joining us in some volunteer activities in the future to help care for the cities that are in the forest. And so I think Lisa gave an introduction about Keep Durham Beautiful a little bit last time. Okay. Yeah, so we're a nonprofit that's been around for 20 years, and we partner very closely with the city and the county. We're super appreciative of our partnership with Durham County Cooperative Extension and Ashley for her teaching of this program. Our office is pretty small. It's me, Mason, and Dawn Keyser, who's our program director, and she does a lot of coordinating with volunteers as well. And
discussion, tree ID walk, something to, where we go and really to a specific area that has trees that need pruning and care otherwise, and do something together, and also have more of a, social, like, connection, you know, where we actually can see each other beyond the classroom, and do some things, so that will be fun, so I'm hoping to schedule some of those soon, so watch out for that. And, in September, I think some of you came to the tree pruning, workshop where we had a similar, instructional session at Forest Hills, and then went around the trees there, which was planted 10, 15 years ago to, take care of those guys. So we got a lot done there, and that was great, and thank you to those who did come out. But yeah, we'll have more, so please watch out. And next time I'll talk more about the tree planting that the city is working on and our Keep Durham Beautiful,
Thanks.
yeah, Keep Durham Beautiful's role with that and how you guys can help out. Thank you.
Okay.